This is Fred Beck from Fred Beck's Fighting. Today, I'm very lucky to be joined by Helen Yee. So thank you very much for coming on, Helen. It's good to see you, mate.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
So Helen, just before I started recording, you were just telling me that you'd just been swimming. And when I was doing a little bit of research earlier, it was saying online that you used to swim competitively when you were a lot younger for 3 to 6 years. What was that kind of like?
Swimming is a very hard sport. I actually forgot how tough it was until I got back in not too long ago. I was a competitive swimmer growing up, was two-time state champion. A lot of swimmers that I competed against or trained with, they're now Olympians or pros, and most of them qualified for Olympic trials. So that's kind of my goal now to get back in there and try to train for 2024.
Oh wow, that sounds quite impressive then. How come you kind of stopped the swimming then?
You know, for a long time, I didn't really know how to answer this, but just because, I don't want to blame like someone for me not being able to swim, but I guess the nicest way I could say it is my parents just kind of wanted me to focus on academics, and so therefore I could not swim anymore. I actually don't even know the full answer. All I know is my initial plan growing up was I wanted to be a pro swimmer, a pro athlete, go to USC and swim for them because I competed at USC's pool when I was 10. It was a swim meet called Western Zones. So I competed there and I fell in love with, the school and stuff. And then I stopped when I was 14, swam high school my sophomore, junior year, won state in both my events, the 50 free, 100 free my junior year. And then I couldn't swim anymore.
Blimey, but considering that you're going to be aiming to get into the Olympics in 2024, you must sound like you'd have to swim quite regularly. How are you going to kind of aim to balance that out with the interviews as well?
That's a great question because that's something where I'm still kind of struggling with right now. And that's something I'm actually really stressed out about. But I'm glad you asked because this is something I ask myself every day, just like, okay, 2024, like it's getting closer. It's like we're already almost at 2022. I need to get ready to ramp things up. I need to start competing. And actually, why I didn't compete yet was because COVID obviously shut things down. And then so I didn't have a swim coach. So I'm just kind of going in blindly. And then when I thought I could have a coach to try to help again and give some structure, and then I find out randomly that he retired. So I'm just kind of stuck in a limbo right now. Because initially I was supposed to try to compete by the end of this year. But I think I'm gonna just have to balance by, I might have to cut back a bit on traveling and interviews as it gets closer. But that's a good question because I'm still trying to figure it out.
I imagine you'll be very busy by the time 2024 gets even closer. But I want to go back in time a bit to when you kind of first got into interviewing and you kind of first became in front of the camera. And I was watching a few interviews you'd done previously. You're normally doing the interviewing, but I found a couple where you were actually being interviewed yourself, and you're saying that you're getting very nervous in front of the camera. What was that kind of like? Because it doesn't seem nervous at all now.
Oh, thanks. Well, you know what's crazy? So even the other day, I did a podcast. Well, I have a podcast with my boyfriend, David, the Schmo. And afterwards, I told him I still feel really nervous. Like inside, it's hard to describe the feelings where I feel like it's like butterflies and really anxious. And then my mind kind of goes blank and I feel like I'm sweating. And I still get that even now. I guess, and it's really weird because people are like, no, we can't tell that you're like afraid. But I got into this obviously because I love this sports. I love combat sports growing up watching it. And I just wanted to use this to try to overcome my fear of speaking to people. And the only thing I feel comfortable talking about are sports.
And of course, then you do a lot of the interviews in front of the camera. If you were so nervous at the start, do you ever considering doing it behind the camera and having the camera here and the microphone there?
Yeah, well, I think it's talking to people in general. Even when I'm around people, uh, a lot of them notice like I don't really talk that much, but it's not even because, you know how some people maybe they could get like misread you or get the wrong impression of you, right? And they could think, oh, like she seems kind of cold or something. But it's just because I'm like really shy and always really nervous. So I actually started doing this as a writer because I never wanted to be seen. I never wanted people to even know about me. Like growing up, I truly wish I was invisible. Like I wish if I walked into a room, no one could look at me or anything. And this is in general. And I was like, in elementary school through high school, I've just always been really nervous. And like, if people look at me, but I guess through writing, and then I started doing radio. So I started my own sports radio show. Because again, I didn't really want to be seen. And then I had a friend tell me and try to encourage me, like, look, no, you should try to do stuff on camera. And I noticed some of the interviews or the work that I would do, like some people wouldn't, like they would take the video and not credit me or something. And I'm just like, okay, fine. Like I'll be on camera, but trust me, it was the last thing I ever wanted to do. I wasn't growing up as a teenager being like, oh, I want to talk to people. If anything, it was kind of the opposite.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense then. But what's their initial reason why you were kind of being so nervous in front of the camera?
Like, was there a reason why I get nervous?
Yeah, for like talking to people in front of the
I,
camera, behind the camera.
you know what? I don't know. I mean, I'm glad you're, talking to me about this too, because uh I used to get so nervous. So even the other week, my mom tells me and she's like, growing up, because I have an older sister, and she used to be very outgoing and she still is and very talkative. And she's like, my mom's like, yeah, you're like a statue. Like you just stand there and you don't talk. And I used to get so nervous, I couldn't even talk to my own dad. Like, I don't know what it is, but I've been like this my whole life. So, but I hate it. Like, I hate this about myself. So I started, this career, obviously because I love sports, but because I want to overcome the fear because I hate myself for being so shy. So I'm like forcing myself to talk to people.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
that's kind of understandable then. And you kind of, after a few years, kind of doing interviews or writing about the sport, any sports, UFC, boxing, anything like that, you started a kind of podcast radio thing called Eyes on the Game. Well, what was that kind of like? So I remember you got into a Floyd Mayweather Senior, and that was when he kind of announced that Floyd Mayweather was going to fight Conor McGregor, and that went viral.
Yeah. When that happened, I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Honestly, I sometimes I wish I could go back in time and be like and be more prepared because when that happened, because like I said, so I started on camera just because to further practice and stuff, and obviously I love what I do and I love boxing, I love MMA, but I did not expect that to go viral. I'm just like talking to him, and then so when that happened, and I remember like Fox Sports, Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp, like their show at the time, Undisputed, like they picked it up, and then TMZ, and I had coworkers at the radio station saying like, oh my gosh, like you're on TMZ, like all this stuff. And I'm like, holy crap. And then I'm like, I don't want to cuss, but I was like, damn, I'm not good, like, as an interviewer, So I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how did this happen? But that is definitely one of the most memorable times of my life. And I started Eyes on the Game because so I guess the origins, I was a writer, and then this producer approached me and he's like, I want you, or can you do a radio show with you and two other women, and they're gonna, it's like a entertainment type show. And I'm like, I only want to talk about sports, so I'll do it if I could talk about sports. He said okay. So I started doing it, and again, I'm very quiet and reserved normally. These women are outgoing. After like 2 episodes, he's like, you know, you suck at this. Like you're not good at this. And then this must be the competitive me, the swimmer in me. And I was like, man, that lit a fire under my ass. I was like, man, I suck so bad. I want to do it more. I want to prove to myself I could do this. So then I created Eyes on the Game. I went to the local radio station and bought airtime. So I had to pay for airtime to be on the radio. And then from there, it kind of, you know, the Floyd Mayweather Sr. stuff, like when all that happened, then I got hired by the radio station, and then and Top Rank Boxing. I've done some work with them behind the scenes, and it, you know, that was kind of the origins.
Yeah, Floyd Mayweather is a really good interview to get because he doesn't really give many interviews. Obviously, he's probably very busy. But that's a perfect time to get him. I mean, you couldn't have really picked him at a better time, could you, to get him on there? But especially when Conor McGregor was trending so much and Floyd Mayweather was trending so much, how did you kind of get him on the radio?
Yeah, well, I was like, and I still feel this way, where I feel like I'm not the most talented, but I will outwork anybody. Like, I'm not afraid of hard work. And I pride myself on being able to work like 24 hours a day if I need to. So when I first started again, and I had a full-time job as well, but I wanted to just continue to get reps. But you know, I loved covering the sports. So I actually, it was, I believe, a Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame red carpet. And he walks down the red carpet. And at the time, everything was, I don't even think there were real rumors out, but I was like, you know, your son just retired. And I think that's when Floyd and Connor first started like jabbing or going back and forth, you know, with each other. So it was just like, do you ever see your son coming out of retirement, you know, and stuff like that? And he said to fight an MMA fighter. And I was like, is it Conor McGregor? You know, and actually, because I was so new to everything, when that broke, um, I was getting discredited by a lot of journalists. Okay. And everybody was like, well, most everybody was trying to shut it down. They're like, no, like, that's so stupid. Why would that ever happen? Like, that's not even a thing. So I would actually cry. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, did I do something wrong? Like, I'm just reporting like what he told me. And I mean, thankfully, everything came together. But for a good year after that happened, because nothing was confirmed. And I don't know if you remember during that time, it was people were still trying, because I think negotiations. So they were still going back and forth and trying to discredit, you know, everything. But thankfully, it all worked out. And what a freaking fight, right?
Yeah, it must have been a great start. Because I remember at the start, Dana White was kind of saying, kind of shutting it down, almost saying there's no chance it's going to happen. And then it kind of got close to August, and Dana White's like, okay, I'll be involved. And then everyone knew, okay, the fight's going to happen now. But then, how do you kind of start with your YouTube channel, Helen Yee Sports? That's got over 100,000 subscribers, and you mainly cover kind of the UFC and boxing on that.
Yeah, so I think when I started my radio show, um, and then when I started working at the radio station and doing on-camera interviews, I wanted to just put the videos on a platform. And I think at the time it's really like JW Player, like there's not many, or YouTube. So I was like, okay, you know, I'll just put everything on YouTube. Like it's like a resume to have everything in one place. And that's kind of why, you know, I started the YouTube, just kind of a migration for and a hub for my on-camera stuff.
And of course, you've got Helen Yee Sports. So it's not just Helen Yee on boxing or Helen Yee on UFC. You got Helen Yee Sports. But now you kind of do most of the interviews on UFC and boxing. What kind of made the decision for you to do that? Do you just prefer them?
Well, I actually haven't told anybody, but even so, I was also offered like a year and a half ago to be able to cover the Raiders full time. And I turned it down because I freaking love combat sports. Because they're like, you know, you have to do Raiders full time. And I'm like, well, can I still cover MMA and boxing? Like, I truly freaking love fights. Like, I love this stuff. And they're like, no, you'd have to just do NFL. So I was like, I'll take the risk, but it was so scary, just kind of like betting on yourself. But I started like Helen Yee Sports because I love all sports. Now more combat sports more than like NBA, but growing up, I also loved watching NBA. Like with my dad and my younger brother, was super pro LeBron James, right? Even during the decision, I cried. Like I was just so into it and stuff. But now as time has evolved and, even the sports have kind of evolved and stuff like that, like with NBA having so many more super teams, I don't follow it as much. And the NFL, I never had the same passion for that stuff as I do for boxing and MMA.
I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, even if you just go on Twitter for a day, there's so much news breaking for UFC and boxing. It's hard keeping up with both of those two sports, let alone all the other kind of basketball and American football. And so, how did you kind of meet Dave, also known as the Schmo? Because he's definitely found his niche in interviewing.
I know. And before that, I've never heard of him, probably like most of us, right? But shout out to David, because he's been doing like sports stuff, even as a schmo, for like way longer than many of us know. So that's kind of a fun fact because I think everybody thinks he just came out of nowhere in 2019 at the press conference. But I met him, I feel like December 2018, my transmission in my car died. So, and I was in LA. I was actually going to go interview Ashley Evans Smith. And then in the middle of the freeway, like my car's like slowing down and I'm like, oh my God, like it's going to freaking die. And I'm a Vegas resident. So I'm like, I'm in another city. Like this is in another state and my car's not working. And I've never like not been to an interview. So I'm like telling Ashley, I'm like, I'm sorry, my car is literally like dying. Like, I promise it's not an excuse. Like, my dog ate my homework and stuff. And then so I was covering, there was a boxing press conference that day and the UFC stuff. So I remember I Ubered because I was like, man, I still need to go cover this stuff. I don't care if I don't have a car. I got an Uber. So I Ubered, to the boxing event first and then after UFC. And I get to the press conference and then so I'm like, wait, I'm stressed out of my mind. So I'm looking where to sit. And this is, like I said, I'm shy, I'm quiet, right? So I'm looking to see who looks just kind of harmless so I could sit down. And I see David and I'm like, oh, he looks harmless. So I just go and sit there. And then a few weeks later, I would see him at like the Anderson Silva media day. And that was the first time I've ever like seen his shtick. So he asked me, he was like, oh, can I please get like 90 seconds with Anderson Silva before you? And it was just like me, being the only one that was going to interview Anderson. So I was like, who the heck is this guy? But then I was like, you know what? It gives me an extra 90 seconds to prep, set up my camera because I'm a one-woman band at that time. So then I was like, okay, yeah, you could go interview him first. And then he does his shtick, and I'm like, what the heck? I'm like, this is interesting, okay? Like, and don't worry, he knows I've told him how he felt too. And then I would see him at the Manny Pacquiao press conference in Vegas, and then the Bellator fight. Then I just started seeing him everywhere, but I've never seen him like before that. But he said he's seen me before that, but I really haven't seen him before that. And then we hit it off and literally been inseparable since.
Okay, it's quite a good story then. But what happened to the car though that broke down?
I actually still have it. Yeah, there is a new transmission in it or like a rebuilt, whatever. But yeah, that was pretty painful. And fun fact, David did not Uber me and did not offer me a ride.
Oh,
So it
funny.
wasn't like that time that he was like, oh, let me, try to like take her to the airport or take her, to get her car fixed and stuff. It wasn't that time though.
Dave's a funny guy. And where do you know where you got the idea from to kind of do that kind of Schmo act at all?
Where did he get that idea?
Yeah, where did he get the idea from?
Oh, he's from Chicago. So I know he loves like Rodney Dangerfield, in that whole act and whatnot. So I know he's inspired by all the comedians. And he's a super passionate sports fan. And so he likes to carry just kind of like the Chicago pride. And he prides himself on, you know, comedy, but being knowledgeable on sports. So it's like a more of a sports personality.
Exactly. You kind of got to add the entertainment factor. I mean, you got to find your
Yeah.
niche because it's so crowded. Everyone does boxing interviews, everyone does UFC interviews now. So you got to find your little way in. And obviously, you've got your podcast with Dave. How's that kind of been going? And what's that? I guess you're kind of used to that, obviously, because of the radio.
Yeah. And that's actually what David said to me the other day when I was telling him, like, I still feel very nervous. It's still a work in progress, at least for me internally, because it's like talking to people for a very long period of time. And sometimes like I do better when it's like one-on-one. Like I'm starting to feel more comfortable like that rather than like more and more people, because I still get nervous when a lot of people even just like look at me. Like I still, makes me sweat a little. So it's a work in progress, but I love it because it's challenging. So it challenges me to be more comfortable in that setting, even though David is next to me as my co-host, but it's still a work in progress because I want to just improve, and self-improvement is really important to me.
I mean, it's good experiences. I've interviewed two people at the same time on here, and you've always got to remember, like, oh yeah, and then say I'm interviewing these guys called Dave and John. You always got to say, and what do you think about that, Dave? You've got to say at the end. It's always a bit more difficult. I can see what you mean interviewing two people at the same time, especially if you got two people interviewing two people as well. And just a couple more points before I do let you go on the rest of your day. What do you prefer to cover, boxing or UFC?
What do I prefer?
Yeah.
I think, well, I do cover more UFC, but I love a damn good boxing fight. So I will be at the Terrence Crawford Sean Porter fight.
Well, this weekend then.
Yes.
So what happens when when last weekend or a couple of weekends back when Canelo fought Caleb Plant and then you had Usman Covington, the rematch? What did you do there? Because they're two big fights.
I know, I was so sad. So I'm here in Vegas, right? And I got sick, and I've never gotten sick like that. Like it was pretty bad. Don't worry, I tested for COVID. It came out negative. I don't know how accurate it is, but it said negative. Um, so I got so sick to the point where, because I was supposed to go with David to New York for UFC 268, and then I was like coughing up. I mean, it was really bad. I couldn't sleep. I was just cough attacks. My ribs right now still hurt from coughing. Like it was that bad. I'm not even exaggerating. And so with Canelo Plant being here, I couldn't even go to it. So I went to the weigh-ins, which was cool, right? But I couldn't even go to the fight. I couldn't stop coughing. But I was planning on and supposed to go to the UFC fight in New York. They had to cancel my plane ticket. I was so sad. I'm so bummed. I ended up not being able to do anything but just be sick at home.
It doesn't sound very nice. And obviously over here in the UK, the boxing fights is obviously, I think the UFC always come over in March to the O2 Arena, but the boxing fights, it's either Manchester, Liverpool, London, which are only like 3 or 4 hours away from each other. But in the US, you have to take a plane to some of the other states. Do you find that always difficult and doing all that traveling, especially at the very start?
At the start, I think with the motivation, I enjoyed it. Like there are times not necessarily even flying, or actually sometimes I would, for example, fly to Florida. Yeah, like 2 years ago, I flew to Florida, did interviews at American Top Team, and then flew back that same day to go straight to the Golden Knights game to cover that. So like I did all that within a day, and I did like a couple interviews, and then the Golden Knights. I don't even know how I managed all that in one day. But and then I've done stuff where I wake up at 4 a.m. to drive to Big Bear to, that was actually my interview with Prince Charles Martin. And I interviewed him, drove all the way to Big Bear to interview him. And then I either come back that night, or there's been times where I'll just sleep in my car. Like, it's just when you want something and you're so hungry and motivated for it, like, at least for me, I'll do whatever it takes. So if I have to sleep in my car, if it has to be those day trips that are really crazy, it's just, I don't really think of that. I want it so bad.
And I guess that's kind of the motivation, desire you got to have. Obviously now you're quite successful. You got the 100,000 on YouTube. Just one more point before I let you go. Do you have anything else coming up? Obviously you got the podcast, you got the interviews. Any other big news coming soon?
A little. I mean, maybe swimming related. But as of right now, yeah, the podcast, which is the Schmo Zone. So it's, even though it says the Schmo Zone, unfortunately, he's not the schmo in it, you know. So it's David and me. There's been people that have been like bummed because they're expecting it to be like, oh, the schmo, but it's himself, his alter ego. So we do that podcast every week, and then I have my interviews at Helen Yee Sports, and swimming. I'm definitely trying to compete, but the only hint I could give is I'm really taking a big bet on myself for the swimming, and I'm going to do whatever it takes. So there is some stuff coming soon, but I can't really say it because, I just, I'll wait for it to happen.
Yeah, I can imagine people being like, oh, why is this Schmo not doing his act? But having to do that act for about an hour and a half on a podcast will be quite hard work.
It must get draining. I know, even like me sitting next to him, and when he's doing that, it gets really tiring because I don't know if you noticed, but he's very different like when he's not the schmo.
Yeah, well, I have to get a word. I have to do an interview of him then one day, and then we'll see what he's really like in person. And who thought of doing merchandise?
We do have merchandise, yeah. So
Okay,
it's,
where can people find out then? Where can people buy it?
yeah, theshmozone.com. So it's the Schmozone shirts, and it supports what we do, and supports the Schmozone. Like Dan Hooker recently wore it, and the UFC like captured him wearing the shirt. So it was pretty cool to see. And we're just very grateful for everybody's support. This journey, it is not what it seems like. It's a lot of hard work, and we're grateful. We love working hard. We're not afraid of hard work or anything. So, we're just very grateful for all the continued support and all the love and the fans.
Yeah, of course you deserve it, Helen. You worked very hard. I remember seeing your channel 6 years it's been going for, so that's a very long time. Anyway, thanks so much for your time today. I know you're very busy. So where can people find you on Instagram and Twitter? Anything else?
At Helen Yee Sports. And thank you so much, like, for being 17, you said?
Yeah, 17.
Yeah, you're very good. You're very natural. And, I appreciate you doing, the research, and you just giving me the time. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure we'll catch up soon then, Helen. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.